Thank you for taking the time to sit
Sure.
with me, sir. I really appreciate it. So, first question is, as Vice Chairman, why is it important for you to visit places like Kessel Run?
Yeah, you hear all about Kessel Run up in D.C. Certainly the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief are really high on the work that is taking place here, for such good reasons. Because as I told the team just a while ago, what I find is that the work that Kessel Run is doing is pacing the Joint Force, right? And very, very important. So certainly they're pacing the Joint Force, but they're working with the Joint Force because everything is a joint solution right now. And so to get an opportunity to come out and see what the work and that the team is doing here, to kind of hear from the experts that are doing both the technology side of it, the program management side of it, the contracting side of it. This is all really, really important. And I do think about everything through the force and the foundry, right? The force is the going out and fighting and winning, and the foundry is everything that makes it happen. I think Kessel Run is right in the middle of both of those. And so for me to be able to come here and see that Venn diagram, that intersection of the force and the foundry, it's just very, very useful.
So as you were kind of talking about how everything kind of touches everything right now, and recently the Army and the Air Force announced major changes, when we're trying to move away from focusing on missions like counterterrorism in the Middle East to challenges that we're facing with strategic competition. And the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, has said we're out of time. So what are your thoughts on strategic competition, and what do we need to do to be ready?
Yeah. It actually starts with the National Defense Strategy, in which we define China as the pacing challenge and Russia as the acute threat. This then is the return to great power competition that you're talking about. We've been remarkably successful after 20 plus years in the desert, but the world has changed, and we have to change with it. It doesn't mean take our eye off the ball about all things violent extremist operations, organizations, and just certainly see what's happening in the Red Sea or in Israel or in Hamas or the rest. So these all are still challenged, but the existential threat is in the Western Pacific primarily, and certainly in EUCOM. So that is the imperative, I think, that leads us to thinking about winning in the high-end fight. Absolutely critical. And the more we take our eye off of that, the more we're falling behind potential adversaries. So that's the world we're in. And I would tell you, too, that we had a unipolar moment when it was just the United States. You could think swallow the Soviet Union up until, where we are now. There's some talk about a multipolar unit, so maybe a return to the concert of Europe, all that kind of balance of power stuff. I think we're already moving past that into a multinodal world. So you certainly have great powers, but then you have the Houthis, who are actors who are not state actors, as well as hyper-involved individuals who also have a large impact in the world. So we are in certainly a multipolar world that great power competition speaks to, but it's a multinodal world too, and we're going to have to live in that as well.
Right. So kind of going off that, achieving and sustaining Combined Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or CJAD-C2, is a monumental task for the Joint Force. So what do you think is working, and where do you think we need to be better?
Yeah, so it is a monumental task, and one that's going to be absolutely critical to winning in that great power competition. The fact of the matter is, particularly we can talk about the force side of things, we have to be able to turn and act faster than the enemy. If we're going to live in a hypersonic world where weapons target pairing is going to be so critical, and we're going to have to do that at speed and at scale, then things like combined JAD-C2, CJAD-C2 are going to be important. It used to be JAD-C2. Right, and now we've added our allies and partners, another key element of the National Defense Strategy, and so bringing our partners along with us is going to be important as well. When I came to the Pentagon, I was hoping that dominant decision advantage would be one of those things that I could build my framework on, and we're not there yet. And so I've made it an end state. I'm the first vice chairman for whom it's a 4-year job, so I had 4 years to try to get after that, at least in my small world as the chairman of the JROC, as an example. So we're doing that. But we do have work to be done. We talk about the Army's Project Convergence, we talk about Navy's Project Overmatch, we talk about Air Force's ABMCS or ABMS, and some of the things I've heard about here today. And that's all good, but they all have very different perspectives to it. And this is an area where I think we both have progress in each one of those, but we also want them to come together and stop saying this is my piece of it, but this is our this is what CJSZ2 means to us, and here's how we're helping with that. I think that's changing. It's a cultural change, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense and I are trying to change that, and I think we're making progress.
Excellent. Yeah, because we can't be working in stovepipes.
That's right.
So with major platforms like the F-35 and the Gerald R. Ford class nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, they get a lot of the attention.
They do.
Yet you've spoken about the power of information and data being critical to the next fight. Can you explain what you mean by that and how information and data will play in strategic competition?
Yeah, so again, he who has the data and can use it faster is the one that's going to win. So again, if we look at it from force and from founder, we talked a little bit about the force side in this hypersonic world that we live in. And so bringing the power of a data-centric world as opposed to a network-centric world, bringing the power of a data-centric world where everyone can plug in and get it when they need it, especially when you may be out of touch and then you need to plug back in and get it again and get that update and then get back into the fight. That will be absolutely critical if we're going to turn faster than the enemy. One of the things that we have to recognize, we have to be able to plan, execute, assess, and adapt faster than the enemy, and only data is going to help us with that. It's similarly important on the foundry side, right? So if Congress says to me or to the chairman or the secretary or to any of the service chiefs, as they say to Secretary Kendall as an example, hey, we just gave you a bunch of money for readiness. What'd you do with it? Because you're asking for more. We should be able to show that receipt, right? We should be able to show these are the data-based decisions that we invested that money on. I don't think we're so great at that yet, and that's what we need to do. So again, back to dominant decision advantage, how important it's going to be. It all starts with the data and this transition from network centricity to data centricity, and all the services are all in on that.
So I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about earlier when you were talking about the Middle East, because current events are showing that we can't take our eyes off there yet. So what advice do you have for units like Kessel Run that, everybody wants their support, all the COCOM commanders want our support, but it's hard to kind of provide that level of support that they desire. Mm-hmm. So what advice do you have for units like Kessel Run?
Yeah, Kessel Run is no different than any other entity within the department, within the Joint Force. We all have to struggle with and meet the primary military challenge that the National Military Strategy talks about, which is strategic discipline. So if you crack that thing open, there's a section in there that talks about this idea of strategic discipline, which is how do we do current readiness, right? So a 2-year, 3-year time frame, but yet also think about modernization, future readiness out there. So the demand signal that you might get from, that Kessel Run may get to support CENTCOM in the current situation is all well and good, and they had to meet that demand on the part of the CENTCOM commander. But similarly, they have to spend some time thinking about what the future is going to look like. I think we're best when we're able to come up, and I think Kessel Run is leading the charge in this, when we're able to come up with solutions that are as much as they can be agnostic of the area and are applicable across, right? So bend it back to one of the things we talked about today was flexibility, adaptability, agility. So building bespoke solutions are not where we want. So even though we're trying to meet the demand signal of General Guerrilla and CENTCOM, we also want to say, okay, we can do that, but let's be thinking about how it could apply elsewhere as we think to the future. That's a challenge. It's hard, but we all have to do it.
So in order to accomplish all these things that we're talking about here, we need the talent. So what would be your elevator pitch to somebody that's a recent high school graduate, college graduate, that's considering either joining the uniformed service or civilian service? How do we attract the talent we need to compete with industry?
Yeah, let me even take it up a notch even further, right? But I'll get to your question. I think what we need to have is a national dialogue about service writ large. So whether you want to wear the uniform or you want to wear a suit, right? You're all serving, and there's something valuable and noble in that if you want to be a citizen here in the United States. So if we raise that up, that's a dialogue that I think is not as strong as it should be. And so we all, I think, have a piece of this. Service in one of the joint forces, making the case that you can bring your talents to the joint force in support of the Constitution and the nation and the international rules-based order. You know, my argument is, if not you, then who? Right? We have this idea that it's the 1% who serve. That's true, but there's a lot of talent out there, and I find that this generation wants to be part of something bigger. This is something bigger, right? So that would be an argument. I said service, national service for sure, military service absolutely, and if you're good enough, come join us because we need the help. It's a dangerous world. We just talked about it, right? This multinodal world, let alone the multipolar world that we're in. So we need the best and the brightest to do everything and to serve in all different capacities. So. If you want to come and be in infantry, great. If you want to be a ship driver like me, great. If you want to write software and hack for us, you know, my take is if you can pass the security clearance, you know, you can have your long hair and your Megadeth t-shirt, I don't care. You know, come do that for us. Come do that for your country, right? And so I think we need to make that case. There are counter narratives out there that are not true and that we need to push back against. The first is this idea that somehow you'll be damaged if you come in. So that is out there. So whether you'll be physically harmed or you know, psychologically harmed in some way. Unfortunately, destructive behaviors happen in the force. They happen in society writ large. But there's this narrative that it happens more in the military service than in others, which is clearly not true. There's also this narrative that we have some kind of lost our lethality. That's also not true. And then the final one that we need to push back on is, hey, if you join the military, that's 4 years of wasted time. Now, we all know that's not the case. Right. So let's talk about those first two real quick. Mm-hmm. So this idea of kind of the you know, you're going to be damaged somehow as an example, right? If you look at our retention numbers, right, which are the best that they have been in 50 years, if any of that negative narrative were true, then people wouldn't stay. So strongly held opinion, fact. That's a way to do it. The lethality argument, right? People say you spent 5 million man hours on some topic that doesn't sound like it contributes to lethality. That's true. But if you divide 5 million by 2.5 million members of the Joint Force, that's 2 hours a year. That's we're talking about some of those things for 2 hours a year. Strongly held opinion. And fact. And then, you know, I would tell a parent or an influencer, which is what we need for the Joint Force, the potential recruits, that this idea that you somehow waste 4 years of their life is categorically false. Your son or your daughter will be a better citizen coming out. They will be a better leader. They'll have more discipline. They'll be much more hireable. And all of the tools that we put in the toolkit of a soldier, a sailor, an airman, a Marine, a Guardian, or Coast Guardsman will set them up for success in life in spades. So I reject all those notions. Agreed.
I mean, whether they sign back up for another 4 years or not, whatever you learn here can be applicable in both directions.
That's exactly right.
So, well, sir, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything that is there any question you think that I missed that you want to touch upon, or anything you'd like to kind of close us off with?
No, I would just say, once back again to the Kessel Run team here, the work that is being done here demonstrates to me an ethos, a culture in which you're not just specifically working on Secretary Kendall's operational imperatives. Yes, you are, and so he won't get mad at you for that. But and you should be, because he's spot on. But you're also thinking joint and more broadly, and that will make the joint force better. The more we have various entities do that, the better we're going to be, because everything is a joint problem, as we talked about. All domains are joint except one, the undersea. The Navy will own that, right? But everything else is a joint problem. The hardest problems are joint problems, and the way Kessel Run is contributing to solving tough problems in the joint space is really important. So it's a role model for me.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it so much.
Good. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.